Hello, everybody. Originally, I thought I would put together a quick little video showcasing what I was planting post my last spring frost date here in my Ohio garden, which traditionally is around the middle of May. This year, the last frost was May 7th. But here it is almost a month later, and I am still trying to get all of my warm season planting done. It's no real surprise. Every year I tell myself I'm going to have all of my warm season crops in the ground by the end of May, and come the middle of June, I'm typically still planting. This year I can put a little bit of blame on the huge amount of rain we got right after that last frost date, but really it mostly comes down to me once again underestimating the amount of work that I needed to do. So today I'm going to share kind of what that whole process of prepping and planting for the warm season garden has looked like over about the last 3.5 weeks. But first, I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Hisea. This is the busiest time of the year in my garden, and I need a pair of work boots I can reach for no matter what the day throws at me. They need to be waterproof, comfortable, easy to clean, and breathable, something I can wear all day long while working in the garden. Thankfully, Hisea crafts footwear for any and every outdoor venture that check all these boxes. This time of year, I'm grabbing the ankle deck boot, easy to slip on and tackle garden chores, rain or shine. They're flexible, comfortable, and the shorter height is a great option for warmer days. My son loves his Hisea boots too. They're perfect for the kid who's always on the go. They're easy to slip right on and he's off, tackling whatever work or play the day has in store. And if he gets a little too muddy, which happens more often than not, these 100% waterproof boots are super easy to just spray off with the garden hose. Good as new. Best of all, Hisea offers a 100-year lifetime warranty and a 100% keep dry and warm guarantee. So if you are in need of a dependable pair of work boots, head over to hisea.com after this video is finished, of course, and use my code Growfully for 15% off all Hisea products. Now, let's get into the garden. My first prep task was to chop and drop the cover crops in preparation for planting. These beds were sown with a cool season cover crop blend last fall. Some of them had kind of poor emergence and were oversown in early spring. I'm not even sure what all ended up in this mix. I was just kind of using up whatever I had on hand. Vetch, peas, oats, winter wheat, mustards, tiller radish. But I generally try to wait till most things are flowering or when the grains are shedding pollen to terminate. In my beds up front, I used a hedge trimmers to chop and drop. I used to use a weed whacker for everything, but I like the hedge trimmers because they don't throw residue all over the garden, which is preferable for me for working in these relatively tighter rows. I also like to chop these crops versus just crimping or smashing them down, which I'll show in a bit, when I want to plant into them relatively quickly. I did have some beautiful volunteer chamomile pop up amongst the cover crop, so I left a few patches just so I could harvest these blooms to dry and use for tea and such later on. I harvest every couple of days, and I can't believe how many blooms this small little patch is producing. In the back bed, where I'm planting larger corn plots, I use the weed whacker. It's a lot faster and easier to get a whole big plot down, but it is messy. You can see where I already cut down some rows earlier in the spring to put my potatoes in. Now up here, I just smash down the cover crop, making sure to bend and crimp the stems as much as possible to ensure a large percentage of dieback. I then put heavyweight weed barrier fabric over top of the plot, further ensuring that all of this cover crop underneath is terminated. If I'm smothering a cover crop like this, I prefer to leave the barrier on for at least a week, but several weeks is ideal. About a week after cutting those cover crops, so this would have been about the 25th of May, I felt like the soil might be dry enough in some areas to start planting. You can see here there's still a good amount of residue left from the cover crop. So I just rake some away from the planting area, break up any significant roots that are left, and plant, in this case tomato seedlings, directly into the terminated cover crop. For smaller determinate tomato varieties like this one, I make sure to get my cages in place right away so I'm not trying to wrangle cages over my quickly growing plants. Most of the garden was still too wet to plant, and I realized I didn't have enough trellises up to accommodate all of my tall and vining crops. So I put up a few more cattle panel trellises. My dad had several panels that were cut down to smaller sizes. I typically use a full 16-foot panel, but I really like these shorter panels for fitting into smaller spaces. I use 8-foot T-posts to support these, and while I prefer to use wire to hold them in place, this time I'm just using zip ties since it's what I had on hand. This is my favorite style of support for cucumbers and indeterminate tomatoes. One bit of exciting gardening news is that I learned that a place relatively local to my home has started producing really lovely compost. So I was able to get another couple of loads of that and start adding it to my beds. I really struggled to produce the amounts that I need for my large garden. Some of the beds, like the one I'm working on here, weren't planted in cover crop last fall, but just mulched with chopped leaves. And at this point, the leaves were almost fully broken down, so I just threw the compost on top. Next up is prepping my corn planting area. About a week after chopping the cover crop here, I went in and broad forked the individual planting rows. I've got 2 plots which are both 4 rows and about 20 feet long. Since that cover crop residue is still pretty thick, I find it easier to rake back some of the plant matter before broad forking. This just remains between my rows for mulch. You can see how nice this soil is. Then I added some of that compost to my planting rows. Corn is a heavy, heavy feeder, and I like to always use compost or composted manure in my corn plots. So here's a little garden pan on May 25th. You can see most of the standing water has dried up, which means I can get in and plant even more. Eggplant is going into a spot where I already harvested a big batch of early season radishes. I always have issues with flea beetles attacking my newly transplanted eggplants, but I've found that putting insect netting over it immediately helps a lot. Here I'm transplanting some of my peppers into that cover crop residue. And because I always get questions about the powder I'm putting into these planting holes when I transplant, I'm using the Gardens Alive line of all natural fertilizers. I've used these for years and have always been really happy with them. Next up, I'm direct sowing some beans. I don't typically plant beans in my raised beds, but this bed has some less than ideal soil in it. And because beans are light feeders and more tolerant of less than ideal soil, They're going to get thrown in here until I have a chance to give this bed some more TLC. I'm also planting beans and edamame in my in-ground beds where I chopped more of that cover crop. Again, a lot of residue here, so I'm raking some of this back. Like I said, I'm not sure what was in this cover crop mix, but I think this might have been winter wheat that's giving me a lot of grow back, and I'm not loving it. So I'm cutting this back again. I know with winter rye, if it's not terminated at the proper time, it'll grow back pretty vigorously. So I'm guessing that's what happened here too. A little annoying, but still worth growing the cover crop. I probably should have waited a bit longer to chop it though. Then I can just use my little hand hoe to make a couple of planting rows in here and plant my beans. There's still a bit of standing water down at this low end of the garden and mainly a lot of mud. And I got so tired of squelching through it, I really should have changed into my boots, that I stopped mid-task to fill these paths in with wood chip mulch. I often feel like gardening is somehow simultaneously the best and worst thing for my ADHD brain, as I never get bored with it, but also there are always 1,000 directions to go in at all times, and there are days I work for 16 hours and feel like I haven't completed one single task. But things are much more pleasant with the newly mulched paths to walk on, and I can complete my bean plantings. Next up is my edamame. This year I'm trying a variety called mooncake, which grows to 5 to 6 feet tall. I'm using that chopped cover crop essentially as straw to mulch this planting area. Edamame has always been one of my daughter's favorites. Unfortunately, it's also an absolute favorite of my resident rabbits, who will somehow always find a way into the garden to eat the young plants. I found that I must cover my edamame securely with netting if I want a crop. You may notice that I'm not using an inoculant product with my beans and other legumes. I've had questions about this, and from what I've read, if your soil already has healthy levels of the specific strains of Rhizobium bacteria present, you don't need to apply exogenous inoculant. I've been growing legumes here for many years. When I check my legume roots, I see good amounts of nodules on the roots, and my legumes always present with healthy, robust growth and good yields. All signs that tell me my soil bacteria is optimal. However, if you're growing in less than vibrant soil or have never grown a legume crop in that particular soil before, sometimes you can benefit from applying an inoculant. I'm transplanting some zucchini and summer squash. I'm limiting myself to 3 plants right now, which is still probably too many, but I also like to do summer squash as a succession sowing, so I'll start some more in about 3 to 4 weeks. This is another crop I net immediately, as it helps keep the squash bugs and squash vine borers at bay, at least until the plants begin blooming and I need to remove the netting. One last bed with cover crop here. This one was spring planted, so the cover crop was a bit later to size up than the beds that I've already shown. Because this is a small bed, and most of what's in here is still quite tender, you'll see lots of vetch, also some mustard and tiller radish, which is bolted. I'm just cutting this down by hand with my trusty soil knife. I'm covering this up with more of that weed barrier, and I'll likely plant this in another week or so. It's time to transplant watermelon, cantaloupe, and winter squash as well. First, I'm adding some compost to my hugelkultur bed. I found that my crops like melon, squash, and pumpkins love the hugelkultur beds. I usually have good luck transplanting watermelon seedlings, but something I've started doing for all of my cucurbit crops, so melons, squash, cucumbers, gourds, is to do a combination of both transplanting and direct seeding. If my transplants take off and grow, it gives me a jump start on the harvest. But if for some reason I lose them to transplant shock, my direct sown plants are right behind them. And if both grow, which they often do, I end up with a slightly staggered harvest, which is nice. I'm covering this planting with netting as well. Again, just till bloom time begins, but this helps the plants get a nice jump start without all the insect pressure. Here, I'm transplanting one of my all-time favorite melons, Sugar Cube. The downside of growing my vining crops on trellises is that it's difficult to cover them with netting. So for right now, I'm dusting these with diatomaceous earth to deter insect pests. And very soon, I'll give all of my cucurbits a coating with surround kale and clay. This is one of the most effective organic ways I've found to deter the cucurbit trifecta: squash vine borers, squash bugs, and cucumber beetles. Even with the plants that I net, I prefer to coat them with surround as soon as that net comes off at bloom time. I've also found that regularly dusting the stem and surrounding soil of my squash and pumpkins with diatomaceous earth helps to deter the squash vine borers. Now, typically, I mulch all of my transplants as soon as I set them out. But because everything was so wet at planting time, I held off on mulching, thinking I'd let the soil dry out for a while before I mulched. In hindsight, I'm not actually sure this was the best decision. What happened is after the rain stopped, it got warm again, and the sun has been intense. Even at temperatures in the upper 70s, I was noticing wilting in my plants during midday. And I realized that while the deeper levels of soil were still quite saturated, the top several inches fully dried out in just days, baking in that sun. I spent almost half the day on Thursday watering everything. In fact, I almost completely drained one of my IBC tote rain barrels, which is something like 275 gallons. My established plants were faring okay because of their deeper, mature root systems. But even with those, I have shade cloth on almost everything. I immediately began mulching everything. My tomatoes here are getting a nice thick layer of grass clippings, but I ran out of that quickly, and everything else is getting leaf mulch left over from last fall for the time being. This definitely seemed to make all of my plants happier, cooling the soil, helping retain moisture, and adding precious organic matter to the soil as the mulch breaks down. Now, one thing I didn't mention is all the annual flowers, which I've kind of just planted here and there as I have time in between my other crops. I've already got my marigolds and zinnias planted. I'm working on getting sunflowers in. My nicotiana, wild petunias, hollyhocks, and nasturtium have been planted. And as I get time, I'll do direct seedings of cosmos, as well as more marigolds and zinnias. Now, the last big thing that I have left to do is to transplant all of my cucumbers and my sweet potatoes. I'm just kind of holding out for our next rain at this point. Now, again, because I'm growing all of my cucumbers up trellises, I can't easily net them, so these will get a coating of surround as soon as I'm able. I'm also trying out an interplanting of buckwheat and radish around the base of some of my cucumber plantings this year. According to Cornell University, in preliminary trials, planting alternating rows of melon and radish with a perimeter of buckwheat reduced beetles and increased melon yields. Alternating rows of amaranth or sun hemp have also been shown to reduce beetle densities and damage in cucumbers and zucchini. We'll see if there's any notable difference in this small garden setting. Now, I'll also continue to succession sow some of my warm season crops like green beans. I mentioned the summer squash and zucchini. I may do a second planting of cucumber a little later in the season, all the way up until about mid-July. Pretty soon, most of my spring cool season crops will be harvested as well. Typically, that's about mid-June for many of them. Once those are done and harvested, I will go in and plant those areas with a warm season cover crop. I like to use typically a mix of cowpea, buckwheat, and Japanese millet. And shortly after that, I'll start indoor sowing for my fall crops already, if you can believe it. So if you'd like to follow along with my garden progress as we move through this season, be sure to subscribe to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.